Better Preach, Episode 62. Less is Always More, with Pete Burds. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a 25-year vet of college and young adult ministry. Thanks for inviting me into your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. We love to overcomplicate things. Let me restate that. I love to overcomplicate things. More of a really good thing, like preaching the gospel, has to be better, right? Not always. In my conversation today with Pete Burds, he shares how his approach to giving talks has shifted and developed over the years, and what he chooses to prioritize in a 30-minute talk might surprise you. It did me, and I'm all the better for it. Ironically, my first title for this podcast was Super Complicated, my longest one ever. And then I thought, I'm doing it again. I'm making things much more complicated than they need to be. So I actually put Pete's advice into practice, and we have a much simpler title. So you're welcome. Ever since encountering Jesus Christ through a high school youth ministry program, Pete Burds has used his 5 loaves and 2 fish for the sake of building the kingdom. Through storytelling, leading retreats, and years of experience in youth and young adult ministry, he has proclaimed the freedom found in Jesus Christ to thousands. Pete currently serves as the Vice President of Mission for NET Ministries. He and his family live in St. Paul, Minnesota. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please let me know and share a rating and written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or reach out on my website at ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's a contact form there. It would make my day to hear from you. Stop on over and say hi. Speaking of saying hi, please say hi as well on Instagram at Better Preach. Would love to connect there too. Let's get into it. Pete Burds, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I'm so excited to be with you here today. We are in the NET studios. This is super cool.
It's awesome. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I have a list of people.
A list.
And you've been on a list, Peter.
Great.
I don't know if you knew that.
And then I moved here.
Yes.
I made this possible.
This is so convenient. I could just come down the road. I live just about 5 or 6 minutes from the NET Center. So it's great to be here. Great to be here in the studios. And actually funny, this used to be my office.
I know.
Like 15 years ago for about 6 months. And that was just it.
Welcome home. Welcome home.
I never knew it had such potential.
Right.
So it was not quite as beautiful then.
I'm sure it didn't have the black paint.
No, it didn't. It didn't. I'm not sure it had any paint on the walls. It was like linoleum floors and concrete walls. That's what I remember. So anyway, great to be here. Great to be with you. You've been speaking to Catholic audiences for many years, but I want to know, first, do you think of yourself as a Catholic speaker? You're speaking to Catholics and on stages and in different events, but you've been in full-time ministry. Mm-hmm. What does that term mean, for you? Are you a Catholic speaker?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for myself, I've always seen myself as a bit more of a shepherd, right? I like speaking keynotes, that kind of thing, but I've always been a bit more comfortable in an MC kind of role. And and I think retreat ministry uniquely has always been a gift of mine. And so as much as it's great to give a parish mission or a keynote, just making transitions and helping people from a prayer perspective, move into where the Lord's leading has always been a bit more in my wheelhouse, in a sense. So I don't know if I would consider myself a speaker. I know that I have, but I think that's that kind of more minister heart, that shepherd kind of sense has always been a bit more aware where the Lord's led me, or maybe the place that I've found myself,
Yeah. What is it about that kind of role that's different than I've got a keynote, I'm beginning a talk, and 45 minutes later I'm ending a talk, and that's kind of it. But with emceeing or leading a retreat, it's very different than that. Why do you think that kind of role has resonated with you so much?
Yeah, I think I have a tendency to be a bit more off the cuff, which, has its pluses and minuses. I think in a lot of ways, I'm a bit better off the cuff than I am like, okay, I've got this fully planned out, like leaving room for the Holy Spirit to work and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, just like little opportunities to be able to speak into a particular situation and just like start talking. I don't totally know where it's going to go. And just being open to the Holy Spirit and how he's going to move, how he's going to do things. And I think an element of like creativity is naturally kind of a creative guy. You know, I have a lot like strong fine arts background, and I'm always thinking of kind of new things, kind of an ideas guy, you know? So yeah, I think that's always been, I like being planned. I also plan to be flexible. Maybe that's like a way to put it.
Fine arts. Say more.
Yeah, man. So when I was in high school, I did a lot of painting. The high school that I went to was a really great kind of fine arts school. A lot of people went on to go to like bigger schools and stuff. So I was looking at going to the Art Institute of Chicago. That was like a dream of mine. I grew up around the city.
Yeah.
And the Lord had different plans, and I ended up at Franciscan University studying theology. It's just like a different vein, but I've kind of kept that like creative nature to things. I've just brought it more into ministry than, you know, a canvas.
How have you seen that play out? Maybe as an MC or in talks that you've given or in ministry?
I think I have a tendency to, okay, I've got a talk in front of me. How do I give it a bit of a different twist than what people are expecting?
Yeah.
You know, because especially in our day and age, everybody's consuming content like podcasts and YouTube, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, how do I catch them off guard a little bit? And so whether that's a prop of some sort, you know, as dumb as that might sound, you know, some kind of visual, a video, even just like an approach of it might be, you know, an example. I gave a talk a number of years ago that was kind of on relativism and like the battle we're facing as Catholics, that kind of thing. And as I was preparing for the talk, I was like, okay, something's not totally clicking. And just kind of adopted the idea of C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters and wrote the whole talk just like he writes the Screw Tape Letters, essentially. You know what I mean? So like took the angle of like, instead of this is the battle we're facing, it was more like, this is the battle that we're trying to like champion, you know, from more of like the kind of demon perspective. You know, just little things like that is like, okay, how do we, how can I kind of catch the audience off guard a little bit from an attention standpoint and to give a little bit of a new angle or thrust to things.
Wow. That's a commitment, like in a talk like that. Did you say more about that? Did you start and continue and then finish in that mode, or did you set it up?
I had to set it up so they didn't find it creepy. You know what I mean? Like you had to like kind of start it.
I know, this is what I
wondered. But then it was like 45 minutes of me, you know, talking about the enemy, but referring, you know, the same kind of idea with the Screw Tape Letters. Yep. So it was pretty difficult. Like about halfway through, I think my brain almost exploded because you typically talk about things in a certain way. And so I was trying to do the opposite, and it just took a lot of mental energy, but it was effective.
That's really powerful. For those few who maybe haven't read Screw Tape Letters, describe what that is and how the book reads, because it sounds like then that's what your talk sounded like.
It's essentially a demon that is plaguing a Christian. And so it's kind of these letters that are going back and forth about how to get the Christian off the path, right? And so I kind of went from, given the nature of the talk, around relative all the isms of our day, you know, and the battle that we face as Christians, kind of took a different angle, as though I was the demon informing like younger student demons how to get Christians off track.
Right.
So that was the idea.
Oftentimes I feel like the talks we give are just as much, if not maybe more at times, for us to be rooted in certain things, certain beliefs, certain truths. How did that particular talk impact you?
Yeah, I would say two things. First one is it helped me, I think, identify lies, because that was, you know, that's the premise of the whole thing is like, what are the big lies that are being spoken at our culture? How can I package that in a certain sense so that it's deliverable in a talk, you know? But part of it was just identifying some of the lies that I've experienced, you know, they're just like little kind of thoughts and suggestions from the evil one, that kind of thing. And then the other piece is it was really hard. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
wasn't out of my back pocket. It
Yeah.
was something I had to really like think through and kind of pray through. And I like that. You know what I mean? Just something that's not to just do the easy thing that I always have done. I guess that I do.
How have you seen creativity play out in other ways in your talks? You mentioned props and things like that.
I tend to use a lot of visuals. I think for a lot of people, they're almost like anti-using visuals because people are just locked on their screens, you know, left and right, which is fair. I think that's a decent, a good like thought, you know. For me, at least, I'm a visual learner. I tend to be more engaged with presentations that have some sort of visuals, or it helps me connect dots. So I think I've just included that a lot, whether it be a video or just like a lot of different visuals that reinforce whatever point I'm trying to make, or even to crack a joke, you know what I mean? Just whatever it might be. So I think that's probably the context or the avenue in which I like bring about it for the most part.
You know, at some point we all decided PowerPoint is terrible, and there's probably really good reasons for that. And we could recount that, but how do you use, like, what's a good visual? What's a bad visual?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think something that is beautiful always helps. You know, like I use a lot of sacred art, you know, and different things are just, again, kind of the art background, like kind of oozes out with that.
Is there a particular example that comes to mind?
Yeah. I
Maybe
would
a particular
say,
favorite piece of sacred art.
Yeah. So, well, this isn't sacred art. This is actually, it's at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Okay.
It's on the Sunday afternoon of the island of La Ranjat. It's the name of the painting.
Awesome.
It's by George Seurat. He was known for pointillism is the name of it.
Okay.
So you've seen.
What are his dates, maybe?
He's a French impressionist. You know what I mean? So like 18th century, 18th century.
Not modern. Yeah.
Google it afterwards.
Got it. No, we'll put a link in.
We'll link it in the
there
show
you
notes.
go. Yeah.
Well, you've seen the painting.
Yeah.
It's this massive painting. It's actually in the movie. What's the name of the movie? Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Okay.
That one guy is standing in front of.
Yep.
And so it's this massive painting of 4 million dots.
Wow.
So
pointillism.
Pointillism is the idea. So you stand right up in front of it. All you see is dots.
Yeah.
As you go out further, you see a full picture.
Wow.
You know, it's huge. Like, you know, I don't know how many feet, but George Seurat, it took him about like 3 or 4 years to do, and it's 4 million dots that are on this thing. And so I've used that before, I guess, a couple of different ways, like a salvation history kind of perspective of like, sometimes we see just the story in talking about scripture.
Yep.
We see this story. How does that play out in a bigger picture?
It might be 1 dot, or 2 dots or whatever. Yeah.
Or just like helping people from the standpoint of like, being able to trust the Lord and surrender, you know, where it's like whatever situation you're going through is kind of this little dot. This is what God sees. He sees the whole picture, and he sees what he's doing, and he's not worried about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's up to good things. Because a lot of times that suffering is just right in our face, or that difficulty. So
that's right.
So little things like that. Yeah.
That's great. Any comments on bad visuals?
Too many words. Words don't speak, you know, especially thinking younger. So like anybody under 40, Gen Zers, you know, millennial kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like your image speaks. You know what I mean? That's the talk of the day. And so, most of the visuals I use, rarely am I using words, you know.
In the visuals.
In the visuals.
Right.
So it's all just an image. Yeah, just a picture. So I don't know. That's kind of my route. I will use like quotes every once in a while, but very, very few words, I think, in particular.
Love that. Awesome. All right, let's go back. 18 years or so you've been speaking to Catholic audiences. Is there a first or worst talk that you could share a story about?
Yeah. So my youth ministers growing up, they had a pretty big influence of tech retreats, you know.
Teens Encounter Christ.
Yep. So
tech
retreats, essentially the teens give the talks, right? Is at least the way that they took it, and the, kind of retreat model that they used. And so when I was kind of fresh off my conversion, you know, awakening to the faith and whatnot, they invited me to give a talk. But it was essentially just like a witness, like a personal witness. So it was about maybe 5-7 minutes, something like that. And that was the first time I had ever shared publicly what the Lord's done in my life. So that was like really powerful. really powerful. And I think in addition to that, it was, I was right on the cusp of like making a decision for the Lord. Like I had, but not in that public way, being able to articulate it. And just even to invite people closer to him was just something that was like not really in my wheelhouse, you know, at the moment, because I was still kind of going through it. So maybe they invited me to it a little bit early, but but essentially it was just my story, my witness. And what I think I've always taken from that was essentially, you know, faith, it becomes tangible when we speak about our own kind of like internal stuff. You know, the beauty of the saints is they make faith tangible. The beauty of encountering somebody that's, you know, clearly like rooted in the Lord and in discipleship is they make faith tangible. Right. You know, it's like, oh, I can do this. And so I think I've always taken a bit of like, man, that first talk was just a witness, but I think every talk that I've ever given has a witness because I just, between like the affirmation from it after I gave it and like the connection with the audience and stuff like that, it's just like, there's something here. I don't know, I wouldn't have said it like that, but I think that's always like kind of carried through in a lot of ways. So
were these your peers? Like, were they friends at school or kids at school, or were they from all over?
Yeah, mainly people from school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that like to kind of go public in that way?
I think for me, I'm more naturally introverted, you know. Every person is a threat to steal my energy. And so I married, my wife is like off the charts extrovert, you know, which is great and wonderful. She makes people feel like $1 million, and, you know, that's just like a fun, and then I come along. Right. And, I always say her family is like loud Italian. So they're like an introvert's worst nightmare. And, so I think for me, a lot of my faith was just private at that point. Where to be able to actually articulate it and to say it, and I'm naturally like reflective and thoughtful and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think to be able to say like, okay, this is me now, and to actually express that was just a huge step forward. And then I would say too, like the affirmation just kept it going where it's like, I want to do this, you know, like I really, whether it's teaching or youth ministry, or I don't know what this is, I just know that I need to do this. And, part of that from the response, but also from my internal like joy that came from it. So
as you mentioned earlier, you had this kind of fine arts experience in high school, and you were thinking about the Art Institute of Chicago, but then you ended up at Franciscan. Were these experiences?
Oh yeah, totally.
What kind of moved you?
Yeah, the nature
in
of
that direction.
The nature of like that tech retreat model is a lot of times it's the teens giving the talks, or leading the small groups, doing relational ministry. So the beauty was I got thrusted into that. It's like I'm doing ministry. And I can remember I went to a Catholic high school, and I was in a theology class, and I was like, I think I could do that. You know, I think I could like really engage my peers and do something like this and be effective. So little moments like that, I think, kind of got me more like, I like art, I love Jesus, and this is what I want to do with my life.
So then over the years, as you've spoken to different audiences, are there other convictions that you hold that if I'm going to open my mouth and to share the gospel, or just to share anything about Catholicism, these things are important to me? Not necessarily content, it could be content, but just your approach, or things that, when it comes to Catholic speaking, here are some of my deeply held convictions.
Yeah, there's two that come to mind. And I would say this has been more of a recent thing. So I don't know if maybe just getting older and experiencing life. I would say uniquely, like since COVID, I've felt this more. So we had a kind of an interesting COVID experience. Was my daughter Regina was born 3 months prior to the world shutting down. And then the following March, we had Lucy. So we just went like 1 to 3 in the midst of 2020. So it was just like kind of crazy. And psychologically, what that did for me is we went from being a married couple with a kid to now being a family. And that was a really like big transition for us. And I think what it started to release in me was just like a fatherly heart, you know, which just being a dad, but just like And wrestling with all of that, I've wanted to, since that experience, I think in a unique way, every time I've been approaching a talk, it's like, Father, what do you want to say to your children?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I communicate that in my demeanor, in the words that I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, that's what I want to do, is like, Father, use me to reveal your fatherhood. And I look at that as like, that's what Jesus did. You know, he reveals the heart of the Father at the end of the day. To say it's a privilege is an understatement. You know, it's like every audience you get in front of, quote unquote, or every group of people, it's like, these are the people of God. These are his sons and daughters. Like, I need to be speaking in such a way that encourages, that is compassionate, it's joyful. There's a palpable like love and concern and encouragement that only comes from a father. You know what I mean? That's just something unique. And maybe that's my own kind of approach and journey with it. But yeah, so from a conviction end, that's what I'd say.
You used an interesting word. You said demeanor. Why did you use that word? I mean, what's implied or experienced through your demeanor that you are hoping to get across?
That it's more about my presence and disposition than even the words that I say. Words matter, obviously. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, how many talks have I listened to that I actually remember the content from? There's very few like homilies I remember, very few talks, you know, like content-wise that I remember.
Yeah.
But it's the classic, you know, that's kind of cheesy, but you don't remember what the teacher taught you, but how they made you feel. It's like, well, I want to help people feel closer to the Father, you know, at the end of the day, like to get into contact with that filial dynamic within our faith in particular. And so it's like, if I can come in with that demeanor, that disposition that encourages, has that sense of compassion and joy, it's like that's a good place.
Yeah. And you said this is newer. Obviously, it's connected in part to you weren't a father and now you are. Would you contrast talks, say, in the first 15 years of that, maybe that demeanor wasn't quite there? Do you feel like in any way you're going further into something or actually moving away from something to take on something new that's actually kind of opposite or maybe very different from an approach? So I'm trying to think of it. Is it was always there in seed and there's a deepening of it?
Yep.
Or are you actually in some ways also reacting to, I think this is really needed and it's my experience and I want to move away from something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a bit of both, not to do a cop-out answer, but a bit of both, because I think going deeper into it, it's like, I think I've always had like a sense of that, of like always wanting, just wanting people to be uplifted. This is probably my other conviction to get into a little bit. Yeah. It's like, our world is so hard. Yeah. Like, people deal with so much suffering, you know, and difficulties and trial. It's like, if I'm going to say anything, I want it to be encouraging. I want it to be like uplifting and joyful, and that people experience the love of God through our interaction, you know, and just being there. And then I would also say I'm kind of, I think moving a bit of away from just like younger years. It's easy to have that kind of dynamic, especially when you're affirmed for speaking and things like that. It's like, it's easy to have more of that dynamic of like, this is kind of about me, or I'm just trying to make you laugh, or I'm trying to make like, you know, hit a grand slam for this retreat or whatever it is. Where it was more self-focused, even though it's about Jesus. Sure. And in invitational, it's like it's easy to slip into that of like, what can I do, as opposed to, man, Father, what do you want to do? What do you want to speak? What do you want to say? It's a different place. It's a different departure, you know, is what do I want to say as opposed to what does the Father want to say?
It's harder to do that than just to go up and say true things, you know, and you can give great talks and it can still be kind of about you. Like, again, I think a beautiful challenge, As you look back on these years of giving talks, we grow every year, right? What are some habits that you're still trying to kind of bad habits that you're still trying to kind of iron out a bit, or some things that maybe you've overcome and maybe not working on as much anymore, but were a challenge in previous years. What are some of those things?
Yeah, two come to mind. One, like super practical, is early on, whenever I'd have a mic, it'd be like kind of all over the place when I'd be speaking. So it's right here on my chin.
Right.
There's a couple other speakers I like saw do that. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because it's just all over the place. I get pretty excited, move around a lot kind of thing. And all of a sudden you can hear me really well. And then it's here, you know what I mean? It's just.
And you don't notice the difference.
You don't notice the difference, right?
Speaker,
totally. And so just having it up here on my chin, it's just like, that's where it goes, in terms and I like handhelds.
You do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about,
yeah.
Really?
Totally.
I'm anti-handheld.
Oh, really?
I always prefer a lav or Britney Spears.
Yeah, it's something that like distracts me.
Really?
I've got it up there.
Yeah.
The Britney Spears. Yeah, not my thing.
Okay,
so.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
tomato.
To each their own, right? There you go.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and then in terms of like bad habits, in my previous work, we were working on like a video sort of thing, and I was talking to the video producer, and we were talking about trying to have like a really tight, like 60 to 90 second video. I was like, he's like, oh, that's super hard. I was like, interesting. It's like doing an 8-minute video is actually really easy. Doing a 60, 90 second one is really hard. And I say that because I think for myself, I usually fill the time. If you give me an hour, I'm going to fill that. If you give me 20 minutes, I'm going to fill it. And so what do you do naturally as a speaker is you fill in the fluff. Every story, everything that you do, you like make multiple points. And then you reiterate those multiple points, and then you beat the dead horse with the multiple points. It's just easy to overdo things. And then, I think just stories become really fluffy. And I think for myself, especially early on, it was easier for me to do like, I'm going to do a 10-minute story and I'm going to make you laugh. And then I'm going to make this really minor point, but at least I've got you engaged. And that was kind of the thought process. Now it's like, if you give me 30 minutes, I'd rather just do 20 and cut out a lot of the fluff and have it just be a lot more simple in the approach of it. And again, I think that's just kind of come through a lot of trial and error, but kind of a less is more sort of approach with it.
Yeah.
And seeing different people do that kind of approach, I think there's something really effective there. Cause it's like, am I up here to entertain you, or am I up here to really like speak truth into where you're at, and convey the message of the gospel? And let's keep that simple and just attention spans and those pieces. But I think at the heart of it, it's a bit more of a wanting to kind of cut out the fluff, because what I noticed in myself was a lot of times I would do that because I was nervous. There was like a fluffiness to things, and I'd overdo stories and things like that because at the end of the day, I was just nervous to be up there, every single time it's like, there's like butterflies and things. And so being more anchored in the Lord and being able to cut out some of that has actually, I feel like, even given more confidence too.
How awesome. So when we'll do this a little bit backwards, we'll get to your process in a second, but you're up on stage, you're up giving a talk. And one of the reasons I don't like a handheld is because I have notes. Sorry, it's always about the handheld.
It's great.
One of the reasons I don't like that for me is I'm fiddling with notes. I have notes and stuff that I need to sort of look at and reference. How do you manage? You've got a handheld. Are there notes around? How do you handle that sort of thing?
For me, at least, and I would say a talk that I'm like more well prepared for to qualify it a little bit. But for most things, and I've been blessed to, I've done this for a while. For me, I mentioned this before, plan, but also plan to be flexible.
Yeah.
I need a few like safety things. So I feel like the handheld's kind of my safety.
Yeah.
I've got my Bible and I've got a piece of paper with all my notes on it. I never look at it. Yeah. It's up there with me, and that's like my teddy bear kind of thing, but I never really look at it. So, so most things I would say I memorize essentially.
How do you do that? How do you memorize a talk?
It's kind of going over it a number of times. And I would say in particular, what's the main point I'm trying to make, you know, and really zeroing in. If I had to articulate it in like one line, you know, that's going to be the thing.
Sure.
And so that helps like from a memorization standpoint. And I would also say, and again, use a lot of visuals. The visuals help.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, that visual's coming up.
And you kind of know the material around that and what you want to communicate.
And, yeah. And from my end, it's all about transitions. You know, like transitions are a really big thing for me. Is how do I like have this be pretty seamless the whole way through?
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What makes for a good transition? What makes for a clunky transition when speaking?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like too much thought on that. Maybe a bit even back to like the convictions you mentioned. I do think that that's a big deal. Clunky transitions to me is like you're talking about one thing and then all of a sudden talking about another, and it just feels
total change of gears out of left field. Yeah,
it just feels a little choppy. When I was a kid, my parents would let me watch Seinfeld, you know, which, you know, outside of like lots of thoughts there, right? Yeah. You know, it's just like, it was a decently raunchy show, you know? But I felt like this like affection for Jerry Seinfeld, all of that. My dad was really into the show too, that kind of thing. Fun. And, so not a show I would recommend these days. This was kind of more when I was like in middle school kind of time. But Jerry Seinfeld came as a comedian. He's actually like really clean as a comedian, you know, if you see him stand up.
For sure.
But when I was listening to him, you know, there's laughs and stuff, but the big thing for me was he is a master of transitions. His stand up, it's an hour, but it's one long big joke. Like you'd have a tough time segmenting it out like a YouTube video kind of thing where you like, and when you listen to other comedians, oftentimes they're very choppy, you know, like they've got a bit and now we're going to do the next one. So it's kind of more little bite-sized things where his is really just seamless. And at least what I took from that and like from a speaker perspective is like, if there's a way to not, to always be tying things in from a transition and maybe even back from like the MC kind of perspective or that shepherding thing, like from a retreat and different elements like that. It's like, how do I make this really smooth, you know? And so I think I've always been convicted by that.
There's some spontaneity, there's planning. Do the transitions fall into the spontaneous category or into the planned category?
Probably a bit of both,
you
know? I think planning, it's like, okay, I'm thinking through this, like, you know, main points and stories, like 1 through 8 or 1 through 10.
There's sort of a logic you can see.
Yeah, totally. Like a pedagogy, you know? At the same time, it just kind of comes out, you know? And I feel like, you know, it was probably more choppy in the early days, but it just kind of happens, you know? It's hard to articulate.
Yeah. Cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Share with me a little bit about your process of bringing a talk to life.
Yeah, you ready for this?
I am.
If I'm given a talk, which, you know, there's multiple levels of talks that you're invited to give. Sometimes it's like, here's like the 7 main points we want you to hit. And it's like really articulate. Here's the topic. Other times it's like, go and speak about something. And it's like, all right.
Choose your own adventure.
Thanks for the direction. You know? But typically what I'll do is sit down for prayer. And I don't know why I do this, but I take a blank piece of computer paper. So I've got a blank canvas. For some reason, I always fold it.
You mean like, okay, real quick, like a piece of printer paper?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I've got a blank canvas. I fold it in half.
Okay.
I don't know why I fold it in half, but I think because it like fits in my Bible better, but I just like do that. And then take some time to pray on the right side of the piece of paper that's folded in half. So on the right side.
On the inside?
No. Just on the, so if you fold it in half on the right side. Yep. Yeah. Just
of what's, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
On the right
and you did
side.
it right. Hamburger style. That's the way I do it. So
awesome.
You know, hamburger, hot dog, you know.
Oh, no.
Like how you fold your paper?
No. Is that
like
a thing?
Back in grade school?
No.
Yeah.
Hamburger, hot dog. What's the difference?
Yeah. So
I just did, this is hot dog? Or
that's hot dog.
Okay. That's hot dog style.
Yeah, like north and south, east and west is.
And this is.
That's hot dog. North and south is hamburger.
Oh, hilarious.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
Never.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was born in the 70s.
There you go.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
these
why.
are newfangled ideas. You ever watch kids learn how to tie their shoes nowadays? I don't know. They're doing
What
different
is going
things.
on?
Anyway.
Common Core math,
Exactly.
What's going on?
All right, so hamburger, do you fold hamburger style?
So hamburger style on the right side, I just jot down like little ideas, of like directions and where I feel like the Lord's calling.
Okay.
And again, specifically like kind of from the like, Father, what do you want to say? And yeah, so whether it's a story, whether it's just a like kind of a concept, different things. And I would say roughly 40% of that becomes the talk.
Okay.
So it's like a lot of ideas. I'm not going to use all of them.
Yep.
And then on the left,
so you'll get more out on that piece of paper than you may use.
Just ideas.
Got it.
Yeah, they're kind of throwing stuff out. And then on the left side, generally I have almost like an outline. It's certainly not word for word, but just an outline, like points kind of 1 through 8. I'm going to start with this story. This is where I'm landing the next segment and kind of piece
almost
it out
like a set list.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
It's a great way to put it. Except there is an encore usually. I don't think
we want more.
I don't think I've ever had that.
Keep preaching.
Oh
That'd
my
be
gosh,
sweet.
that would be cool.
That should be.
Yeah.
Let's have it.
Yeah, there you go. So roughly, 8 to 10 points, depending on how it kind of works out. But so that's kind of the writing process. So usually, like, depending on the talk or situation, 2 to 3 sittings. Just like with the Lord in prayer.
Now you're only using 1/4.
Yeah, the rest of it's just
blank
recycling. Yeah,
really?
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
The rest of it's blank.
It all happens right there.
It's just funny.
Hamburger style.
Yep.
On 1/2 of a piece of paper.
Yep. There it is. And then I stick that in my Bible, and that's what I bring up.
Holy cow!
Mm-hmm.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well, that's why you fold it that way. It's got to fit.
It's got to fit in the Bible, right? Yeah, it's more
awesome.
Convenient. Yeah.
That is simple.
It is. Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, there isn't much else, unless there's like a quote that I'm using, which I like using quotes. I like print that out or take a screenshot on my phone.
What do you keep these pieces of paper?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In not a very systematic way. They're all like stuck away in like a folder or something.
Yeah. I'd love to see that folder. I really would.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. You'll see how disorganized my thought process is. It just kind of comes together.
How long does that take you? You said a couple of sittings.
Yeah.
And so what do you find? Are you talking with the Lord? Walk me into some of the nitty gritty of that. What's the experience like? You just sat down. Is there a Bible open, or I don't know?
Again, some of it I think depends on what the topic is, the talk. But
is there a talk recently that comes to mind that you could
I think
walk me through?
Yeah, I think I love Scripture. Always using Scripture, and in particular, I use the Gospels. Like
why is that?
Because it's putting people in contact with Jesus. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. And so if there's ways to kind of build off of the story with Zacchaeus, the story, the prodigal son, and I would say in a unique way when Jesus is interacting with people, because again, it's so hard to have faith be tangible, And so when people can actually see, oh, this is the way Jesus interacted with the blind man, he can interact with me too. I think is just like a really powerful thing. So usually try to build something around a gospel in particular.
Yeah.
And so nitty gritty of it would be start with a story, an opening, like kind of main point, or main concept, drill down on like some content, just like here's some like more like theological content, I suppose. And then towards the end, move into the last like couple of points, inviting people into prayer. So usually what that looks like is some sort of witness from my life of just like an experience that I had of conversion. And then at the end, always an invitation to prayer. Maybe, sorry, a lot of convictions, I suppose, than the 2 I said that I had. Now I've got like 7. Is I think at the end of the talk, I always want to pray. Like at the end of the day, if I'm going to be giving like a keynote, a workshop or some kind of teaching moment, it's different. But if I'm giving some sort of keynote, always an invitation to like a more lengthy prayer, like some sort of prayer response. So in some settings where you do like a praise and worship song, other settings where it's just like, we're going to take some time for silence, just that it's an opportunity for encounter, not just hear this, but like, let's actually talk to Jesus, because that's the big deal. So.
And do you think a lot about that prayer ahead of time, or do you actually think nothing and knowing in the moment based on the talk, you'll kind of know how to pray? Because if that's a key part of your talks in those settings, and I share that conviction, depending.
Oh, yeah.
How does, a lot of times I'll write like pray at the end. I don't often think about it ahead of time. I'm just curious how you approach that.
I think for me, sometimes it'll just depend on the nature of the talk. But I think when I put pray on the paper, what I'm getting at is I'm a big fan of the ARRRRRR prayer method. The R prayer method.
Pirates prayer.
Just like, and the main piece of it is that we're actually acknowledging what's going on in our heart, our thoughts, our feelings, desires, and relating that to the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think one of the tricky parts of our day and age is we think a lot about things, but we don't actually pray and actually relate those things to the Lord.
Yeah.
Goodness, if Jesus only knew what we told him,
Yeah.
And so if I can encourage people, and I'm especially thinking people that are more on the fringes or like unchurched or just kind of in a different place than somebody who's like a really dialed in disciple. But even that, it's like we just encouraging people, like whatever stirred up, let's actually bring that to Jesus and speak to him as a friend. Like to me, like that's a win.
Yeah.
It's like that's I've kind of quote done my job in a sense.
And so what you're in part, there's just there's a modeling.
Yep.
And
of
you're
course.
kind of
totally
giving people example and words. It feels very different than even like an eloquent, spontaneous prayer. There's probably pauses in there.
Yep.
And it feels a little bit more raw.
Yeah. Unpolished.
Honest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then do you allow for space even to pause in that prayer? Or I don't know what that feels like.
Yeah, I think so. And even back to the, being a little bit less like fluffy with my content.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've got a 30-minute talk. I could fill that space with 30 minutes, or I could do 20 minutes and allow for 10 minutes to just pray.
Yeah.
It's like, I'd kind of rather do that.
Yeah.
Because the content's good, but how do we help people, like you were saying, articulate what's going on, or even begin to articulate maybe kind of what resonated. So, yeah.
I love that. I asked a young guy who's been living with us, and he's not a Christian. Asked him one time if he wanted to pray, and he was like, "Right now?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, what should I say?" I'm like, "Well, imagine God is right here with us," which he is when we gather in his name, just like you're talking to me. Talk to him. And I kind of modeled that, and he got it. And it was really cool to see. It was just his like sense of like, wait a minute, you mean we could right now? Like, yeah, right. We're going to do it right now. And it was just so beautiful to hear kind of his honest cry, his honest plea. It was beautiful. I'm glad I had the insight to just kind of make it conversational. He's a younger guy, and it didn't feel like it needed a lot of formality, but it was kind of like what you're describing of just, a lot of times I think of prayer, or I should say, I think a lot of times we think of talks ending with again, I think of a more kind of eloquent, strong, that it's like a punctuation point, but in some ways yours is almost an ellipsis that continues the conversation and allows people to enter into that and to be in contact with God in that moment. And so that's a conviction of yours that is really important.
Yeah, and I think as you use the word modeling, that's the heart of it.
Yeah.
Is it's easy in our day and age to say, go pray, go pray about that. We know that our people don't know how to pray.
Yeah.
Yet we just tell them what to do, right? Without actually showing them how and giving them some tools and articulation with it. That's the gift of like praise and worship music, is it's teaching people how to pray.
Yeah.
That's why it's as effective in evangelization as it is because they're little psalms and simple, and people are rawly coming before the Lord and saying, Lord, I need you, or whatever song, you know what I mean? And that's the real gift of it. So it's like, how can we help people enter into that dialogue? Because that's where conversion comes. That's where encounter comes. And that's where I want to lead people.
Amen. Pete, it's great having you.
It's awesome to be here.
Great to be here with you in your space.
In your office.
Yeah,
your old office, right?
Where could people connect with you online?
Yeah, NET Ministries is the big thing. So netusa.org. Been blessed to work here just the last like 5 months, which is kind of wild. So
Welcome
we just moved up
Cities.
in July, which is just crazy. We moved from Milwaukee, love Milwaukee in so many different ways. It was hard to leave, but it's amazing being at NET, and there's great people, and good to be here. So
netusa.org would be a place to go.
Where to find me.
Awesome.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks for coming on the show and just going deep right away and allowing all these pesky follow-up questions I've got for you.
I love it.
We're in person, and just a lot easier to kind of go right there than it might be sometimes when I'm online. So this is awesome.
It's a gift. Great to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Pete. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please reach out on Apple Podcast or Spotify by leaving a rating and written review, or reach out on my website at ryanohera.org/betterpreach. There's a contact form there. I'd love to connect. And you all have millions of choices when it comes to podcasts. Thanks for pressing play today. See you next time.